Welcome to the second lecture in our Marble Hill Autumn Lecture Series entitled Marble Hill, Local to Global. Marble Hill is being revived, which is why we're talking today, and it's a really exciting opportunity with £5 million being gifted to us by the National Lottery and a subsequent 3 million by English Heritage, the charity itself. But what will this revival do? Well, it will see the house being open for 5 days a week for free. And we look forward to whetting your appetite today about that one. The landscape is being invested in and making sure the place is biosecure, but also some of those wonderful heritage aspects are being brought to life through our gardeners and our volunteer team as well. We're investing in the sports facilities for our community to safeguard this site, and also we've got the most fantastic cafe on site. So every time you go to have a nice cup of coffee, you can know that you're giving back to the charity and supporting the heritage throughout the country. We have a raft of events, everything from celebrations of dance to this weekend's celebration of theatre with 3 local groups sharing on the Oval Lawn this Sunday. But also we've got this amazing autumn lecture series with some really super speakers. I feel very lucky to be working with them. The 21st, so next week, we've got Tracy Borman, and she's talking about local to global, King's Mistress and Queen's Servant, and she's the writer of this lovely book. And on the 28th, we've got Dr. Judith Fawley, who's talking about Marble Hill and Gulliver's Travels. And so really exploring that global to local link. You may well know her from the Luminaries series. And on the 5th of October, we have Dr. Carol Ann Dixon, who will be speaking about her teaching and learning of enslavement histories. I'm so pleased today to introduce someone very special to Marble Hill. Our speaker has been the collections and the interiors manager at English Heritage for 9 years, and her scope has encompassed English Heritage Marble Hill. But it was with great sadness that she left a few weeks ago to be the keeper of art at the Lane Gallery in Newcastle, which is a great delight for them, but a sorrow for English Heritage. But it's testament to her generosity that she promised to honour this commitment to come and talk to you this evening. So it is with great delight that I welcome Dr. Esmé Whittaker.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here this evening. So in my talk this evening, we're going to explore a decorative style known as Chinoiserie. This hybrid style is part East Asian and part European, reached its height of popularity in Britain in the mid-18th century. It encompasses both objects made in East Asia for the European market, such as porcelain, lacquer furniture and wallpaper, and the European imitations they inspired. But underlying this style is a much wider story, a story of trade, of cultural exchange and cultural misunderstandings, of entrepreneurial spirit, of changing fashions, and also changing notions of female taste. But what, you may ask, is the relevance of Chinoiserie to Marble Hill? The house, built between 1724 and 1729, is after all a typical example of a Palladian villa, an architectural style inspired by the 16th century Italian architect Andrea Palladio and the classicism of ancient Rome. Chinoiserie was, in fact, regarded by critics in the 18th century as the antithesis of the cultivated classical taste which the villa represented. As Robert Morris claimed in his postscript to the Architectural Remembrancer, published in 1751, the peculiar fondness of novelty, the affectation of the improperly called Chinese taste, consists in mere whims and chimera, without rules or order. Novel, strange, and even monstrous, Chinoiserie was quickly associated with irrational female taste. Yet, as recent studies of this style have argued, it could be an empowering choice for women. David Porter explains, Chinoiserie embodies the newly found freedom to create eclectic, individualized living spaces and to imagine the subjects who inhabit them as capable of a degree of self-determination beyond the bounds of rigidly prescribed roles. Beneath the criticism and satire lies the fact that chinoiserie was advanced by female patronage. It was often typically women's spaces, so bedrooms and dressing rooms, that were decorated in this style. But at Marble Hill, there was barely a room that did not contain a piece of lacquer furniture or porcelain. But then Marble Hill wasn't a typical 18th century house, as it was built for a remarkable woman, Henrietta Howard. Now, I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more about Henrietta's biography in the next lecture in the series, but just to give a summary of why she was a remarkable woman. She was an influential courtier, a friend of poets and politicians, and the mistress of the future King George II. After a promising start in life, born into a titled family, the Hobarts of Blickling Hall in Norfolk, she overcame adversity, so the loss of her parents, but also her disastrous and abusive marriage to Charles Howard, the youngest son of the 5th Earl of Suffolk. And they descended into poverty. But Henrietta was determined that that was not going to be her lot in life. She managed to raise the funds to travel to the Hanoverian court and ingratiated herself with the future King and Queen of England. So on the accession of the Elector of Hanover as George I of Great Britain in August 1714, Henrietta returned to England and was made Woman of the Bedchamber to Caroline, Princess of Wales. And soon after, and perhaps more crucially for our story at Marble Hill, she also became mistress of the Prince of Wales, later George II. And it was almost certainly his large gift of £11,500 of stock, jewels, plate and furniture in 1723 that made the building of Marble Hill possible. It was with the help of her network of advisors, including the architect Earl Henry Herbert, 9th Earl of Pembroke, and the leading 18th century architect Colin Campbell, as well as the builder architect Roger Morris, that the house was constructed in the newly fashionable Palladian style. But it's actually the alterations and decorating choices that Howard made after she moved into Marble Hill, which will be the focus of the talk this evening. And in particular, the construction of a china room and dining parlour, as they epitomise her taste for chinoiserie. This taste was well known amongst her friends. Lord Chesterfield wrote to her from The Hague in October 1728 to inform her that there was an extreme fine Chinese bed, window curtains, chairs, etc. for sale, and if she was inclined to purchase them for Marble Hill, he would assist. Howard may also be the aloof Chloe in Alexander Pope's Epistle to a Lady, who, while her lover pants upon her breast, can mark the figures on an Indian chest, and when she sees her friend in deep despair, observes how much a chintz exceeds mohair. She was aware of both the appeal, but also the negative associations of the Chinese style, which was regarded then as low taste, writing to Herbert that, "My chaney room will make you stare, if not swear, though I must tell you 'tis the admiration of the vulgar." This letter shows that the china room was largely completed by July 1739. It comprised, as J. Norris Brewer noted in 1816, a small but tasteful cottage located to the northeast of the main house. Although it is thought to have originally been a standalone building, it became subsumed within the two-storey L-shaped service wing, which contained the servants' hall, kitchen and laundry. The service wing had been built by the 1740s, and it was included in around 1749 on the survey of the gardens. The china room itself was located on the first floor, and according to the 1890 sales particulars for the house, it was described as a studio and could be accessed from the scullery by a, quote, flight of stairs leading to two upper bedrooms and a studio having a painted domed ceiling, small room and closet adjoining. Howard and her guests probably would have used this pedimented doorway on the east facade, which gave direct access from the garden to the china room. And it's from this viewpoint that it actually appears like a single story structure, as the service spaces were at the same level as the main house's basement. Sadly, both the service wing and the china room were demolished in 1909, and no photographs to survive of the interiors, or no photographs that we've yet found or come across. But fortunately, the appearance of the interior of the china room was described upon the opening of the house by the London County Council in May 1903. On the east side of Marble Hill was a small cottage, which originally formed the china room of the Countess of Suffolk, but is now joined to the house by the servants' quarters. The chamber on the first floor still retains its gaily painted ceiling and the peculiarly shaped shelves with their gilded edges upon which the Countess's china was displayed. Now, Howard was an avid porcelain collector, and when the compiler of the earliest surviving inventory of the house when it was drawn up in 1767, shortly after Howard's death, when they came to list the items in the china room, they were simply defeated. They wrote, finding that it was not possible to take an inventory of the china, it was agreed on to take only the amount of pieces of Japan in the said room, simply adding, and all the china as it stood at Lady Suffolk's decease. So basically the inventory taker listed the items of lacquer furniture or lacquer items, which is the Japan, but gave up because it was on the sheer quantity of porcelain. The room was not only fitted with carved and gilt-edged shelves, but also furnished with 2 Japan or lacquer cabinets and various boxes, a trunk, tray, and tea boards or tea trays. More details of the porcelain are also given in a list of items removed from the china room in January 1794, indicating that the room was used to display blue and white beakers, jars, and bottles. Now, these pieces were removed by Howard's great-niece, Henrietta Howard, who, upon the death of the second Earl of Buckinghamshire the previous year, had inherited Marble Hill. Howard chose instead to occupy the smaller Marble Hill cottage, which lay at the southeastern corner of the estate, and took many of the items from the main house with her. Her great-aunt had in fact left her all my plate, jewels, china, and Japan, with whatever shall be contained in cabinets, chests, or boxes under lock and key. So it's actually, in a way, she did us a favour by removing these items and recording what she'd removed, because it gives us further clues of the original contents of the house. As Howard's friend John Gay famously satirised in his poem To a Lady on her passion for old china, women were regarded as having an insatiable desire for porcelain. China's the passion of her soul, a cup, a plate, a dish, a bowl, can kindle wishes in her breast, inflame with joy, or break her rest. Despite the criticism that china collecting was a sign of irrationality and excess, the exchange of porcelain can be regarded as a mark of female friendship. One such friend was her future sister-in-law, Lady Elizabeth or Betty Germain. Due to her marriage to Sir John Germain, Lady Betty Germain came into possession of Drayton House in Northamptonshire, which was, in the words of Horace Walpole, crammed with old china. And she also had a lacquer panelled china closet in which to display those items. An auction of her possessions following her death included large quantities of China and Japan on 3 days of the sale, as well as 2 magnificent ivory vases, which were probably the 2 ivory antique cups with gilt covers, which Howard left to Germain in her will and are now in the collections at the British Museum. We know that the friends also exchanged china and private jokes, as the letter from Anne Chambers in 1731 suggests. Lady Betty has sent you through a Tunbridge faring 2 cups and 2 saucers, and thus she bade me say, you love old china. Sure, I may venture to say this is really so, I being informed that these are the pictures of our first parents drawn from life, and at that time of the year when the fig tree ceases to produce leaves. Germain mischievously urges Howard to use these cups, which were presumably decorated with the naked Adam and Eve, to serve tea to Lord Hervey. And I'm just showing you a wonderful picture of the tea party at Lord Harrington's house, and that's because you might recognise from the previous slide that you can see Lady Betty Germain there sitting at the tea table with some blue and white porcelain laid out on the table. We also have in this scene Henrietta herself. She's the lady dressed in that kind of wonderful orangey brown at the card table at the centre of the scene. Queen Caroline also loved china, and Lord Chesterfield wrote to Howard in 1728, urging her to pass on a service for her tea and chocolate, as well as a ewer and basin that he had obtained in The Hague. He writes, I have bought some china here, which was bought by the last East India ships that came in, of a very particular sort. Its greatest merit is being entirely new, which in my mind may be almost as well as being undoubtedly old. China was appealing both for its novelty, but also its connections with what was seen as ancient civilization. Now, we can't say for certain who was responsible for the design or the decoration of the China room, but there are some clues. According to a ledger at Coutts Bank, a payment of £200 was made to Roger Morris in November 1739, which may suggest that he had been involved with the building. And if we return to the letter which Howard wrote to Herbert in July that year, it is clear that he'd not seen the completed room and Howard was anticipating his reaction. But she was also seeking his approval, adding, but my vanity would be entirely gratified if it should meet your approbation. Now, the context of this remark is interesting, as Howard was responding to his request to come to Wilton, Herbert's ancestral home near Salisbury. And although she was unable to do so due to ill health, she looked forward to visiting the next summer, when she will admire your handiworks at Wilton. Between 1733 and 1749, Herbert employed the French decorative painter Endion de Clermont to decorate 5 rooms in the south wing at Wilton. He appeared in the Wilton accounts as the Little French Painter. Clermont had trained as a flower painter with Antoine Manoyer and developed a decorative Rococo style that, as Walpole puts it, comprised grotesque foliages with birds and monkeys. Herbert was one of the most important patrons, and he was involved in another commission to decorate a fishing lodge which had been designed by Roger Morris for a small island on the Thames near Maidenhead that had been purchased in 1738 by the 3rd Duke of Marlborough. And Clermont's decorations comprised monkeys playing summer sports. Now, 1738 marked the beginning of the spate of commissions along the Thames, including for Howard's neighbour, John Robarts, 4th Earl of Radnor at Radnor House. And his final commission before returning to France in 1754 was for the decoration of the ceiling of Walpole's Library at Strawberry Hill. It has been suggested that Claremont was also responsible for painting the closed ceiling of Howard's China Room in 1739. H. Clifford, writing in 1939, described the Countess of Suffolk's library with carved shelf mouldings, secret doorways, and an arched ceiling painted with arabesques by the hand of Francois Claremont, noting his work at neighbouring Radnor House. Now, although we have no archival records to substantiate the claim, the ceiling, described in 1901 as having floral and scroll designs interspersed with figures of monkeys, etc., certainly sounds typical of Claremont's work. The only reference in the archives to a painter carrying out work in the China Room is the bill from Daniel Rivers for work between September and November 1752. Rivers was paid for 3 brushes for the China Room and for making and painting stands. By the early 1750s, work was also underway on another Chinese room at Marble Hill. 3 detailed bills from the joiner Charles Ross, covering the period 1750 to 1752, show the extent of the alterations made to the house at this time. In addition to work on the service wing, Ross was paid to replace sash windows and shutters, to install festoon curtains, and to take down hangings, sconces, and a bed. His work focused particularly in a room called the library, where a new floor was laid and a nest of pigeonholes created. On the great stairs, the wainscot and carved work was repaired, and in Howard's bedchamber, the wainscot was pulled down and cleared, while in the hall there were busts fitted to the walls. And Ross's work was overseen by the architect Matthew Brettingham. Now, Ross's bill also makes frequent reference to a new room. For example, he charges the 3 square feet of new naked flooring framed in a new dining room that is now Chinese hangings made out to the old pantries. The bill makes clear that this room is adjacent to the hall on the ground floor, and it's thought to be the room located in the southwest corner of the house. The plan, published in the Trivius Britannicus in 1725, shows this corner of the ground floor comprising 2 smaller rooms with a connecting lobby. So if you can see my cursor there, we're talking about this space here. So the 2 connecting rooms with the lobby. So this wall was demolished, so it forms one room as it does today. Ross was responsible for preparing the walls of the new dining room for Chinese paper. In September 1752, he spent 6 days battening the walls of the new room for the upholsterers to strain the canvas for paper, which he described in another version of the bill as battening your new room to put your Chinese papers on. The upholsterer was the fashionable furniture maker William Halley, who spent 47 days hanging 40 yards of linen, 17 quires of paper, 62 sheets of India paper, and 135 yards of border. There was an issue with Halley's bill, which was not settled until 1755 when he threatened to sue. The wallpaper supplier, Thomas Bromwich, gave his opinion of the work and what Howard ought to pay, concluding that Halley should be paid the large sum of £42.02. Whether Bromwich's role extended beyond that of the adjudicator and intermediary to the supply of the wallpaper is not certain. It's possible that the paper was purchased for Howard at auction. A Chinese landscape wallpaper installed in the Chinese bedroom at Blickling Hall has the inscription Suffolk, so alluding to her title as Countess of Suffolk, and lot 30 and the date 1758 on the reverse. This suggests it was purchased for Howard rather than her nephew, who owned Blickling Hall. Now, hand-painted Chinese wallpapers could take 12 to 18 months to arrive in England, and this fact only added to their exclusivity, so you can see the appeal of purchasing at auction. Emile de Brun has suggested that the 62 sheets of India paper used at Marble Hill were in fact more readily available Chinese paintings or prints, which were pasted to the wall as a collage rather than the purpose-made decorative paper wall coverings supplied in elongated sheets, which only arrived in Britain in around 1750. This would explain the large number of sheets required, and also a reference in a letter from Bromwich to Howard's lawyer that he'd taken off part of Hallé's bill on account of the pictures. This was possibly the work that Hallé was required to repair before the payment could be made. There had also been damage to the floor, but Hallé insisted that that was caused by other workmen before his workmen entered the house, which I just love. It's like, it never changes really. It wasn't us, it was the previous builders. And I think these accounts are really interesting because again, they show how it was actually because there was a dispute around the payment of this bill that we have this evidence that might have otherwise been lost. But unfortunately, no fragments of the original Chinese wallpaper survived at Marble Hill. The 18th century method of hanging expensive wallpapers consisted of applying the paper on top of a lining paper and linen, which was stretched across wooden battens attached to the walls. Now, this meant that it was kept slightly away from the wall, protecting it from damp. But it also meant that wallpaper could in fact be moved intact if the owner decided to alter or sell the house. And we know that this frequently happened. So it's possibly why we don't have any fragments of the paper left in the house today. So what we do see today in the dining parlour is a wallpaper that was installed in 2006. It was hand painted in central China using the same materials that were used in the 18th century. So white mulberry paper mounted on a superfine silk, which was backed with another layer of mulberry paper, then painted with watercolour, gouache and tempera, which was applied thinly in order to prevent it cracking when it was rolled up for shipping. And the artist who produced this paper spent in excess of 1,000 hours on the project. So it was a very labour-intensive project. So this replica paper, a bird and tree pattern, was chosen as it was popular in the 1750s when the dining parlour was constructed. Now, when I say popular, I mean popular in England, as wallpaper such as this was not used in Chinese houses. It's thought that it was inspired by the Chinese tradition of painting panelled screens and decorative window papers, but it was a product developed for the European market. And this is a common theme with Chinoiserie. It's a European idea of China rather than the reality. Through his extensive study of Chinese wallpapers in National Trust houses, de Brun has noted how they tended to be hung in relatively private rooms, often associated with women, such as bedrooms, dressing rooms, and drawing rooms. Using Chinese paper in a ground floor dining room, which was considered in the 18th century to be a masculine space, is not unheard of, but it is unusual, meaning that Howard simultaneously conformed to and subverted the trend. Apart from the decade when Howard was married to her second husband, George Berkeley, from 1735 until his death in 1746, every room at Marble Hill could be regarded as a woman's domain. Neither Howard or the Chinoiserie style had to be confined to a private or a peripheral space. And this is certainly the impression given by the 1767 inventory, which lists an abundance of Indian screens, Japan cabinets and clothes chests, as well as porcelain displayed throughout the house. Now, more detail is once again provided by the list of items removed from the house by Howard's great-niece in 1794. In addition to the china and lacquer furniture, the collections included a pyramid with an Indian figure on the top in a glass case, and 2 other Japan cabinets with pagodas on the top in glass cases. In the Great Room, the central and principal room of the house, the set of 4 marble-topped pier tables made in about 1730, possibly to a design by William Kent, were laden with tea boards holding china, tea and coffee cups and saucers, 5 teapots, basins, sugar dishes and cream pots. A reminder that the taste for tea and the fashion for chinoiserie were directly linked. Tea was introduced in England around 1650, and it was first seen as a cure for ailments. But by the 1730s, it was the most fashionable refreshment, a fashion which only increased as the 18th century progressed. Tea was imported by the East India Company, the sole English trader to East Asia, and Chinese porcelain proved to be the perfect ballast for bulky but lightweight crates. This tea set from the Kangxi period, from 1662 to 1722, did not belong to Henrietta, but it is typical of the type of porcelain she would have used, and it's normally on display in the ground floor breakfast parlour at Marble Hill. So the tea leaves, either green or black, would have been stored in the flat-sided jar and carefully measured out using the pull-off cap into the small teapot. Once the tea had steeped, it was poured into the small handleless cups, and sugar was added using the sugar nips, and then milk, which was an addition that was not actually popular until the end of the 17th century. Now, each cup only provided a few mouthfuls of tea, and the leaves would then be discarded into the slop bowl. Now, as you see from this image, Chinese porcelain not only served a practical function on the tea table, but was used to decorate the 18th century interior, whether displayed in clusters on the chimneypiece or positioned on the hearth in the summer months when the fires were not lit. The inventory of Marble Hill mentions china jars over chimneys and on top of and beneath lacquer cabinets. In the Great Room, there was also, according to the inventory, a large-leaved India screen. This 8-leaf lacquer screen was made to order in China in about 1735 and has Howard's family crest applied in the original lacquer. Today, it is sadly one of the few remaining pieces from Howard's collection, and it was identifiable for repatriation as it literally bears her mark. Despite Howard's best efforts, including a stipulation in her will that the furnishings were to remain in the house, by the time that Marble Hill came into public ownership in 1902, little of the collections remained. But as the collections were redeveloped in the 1980s, it was very much Howard's taste for chinoiserie that meant that Marble Hill was seen as an appropriate home for the Lazenby Bequest, which was presented through the National Art Collections Fund in 1988. The collection, formed by Rosemary and Monty Lazenby, included pieces which illustrate the complex process of exchange of ideas and materials between Europe and East Asia in the 18th and 19th century. Due to the fashion and great expense of importing goods from East Asia, European manufacturers attempted to emulate Chinese porcelain and lacquer furniture. The English potteries longed to discover the secret of hard-paste Chinese porcelain, with its whiteness, translucency, and brilliant colours, especially as the porcelain was subject to heavy import duties, so it was only the wealthy that could afford it. In the 17th century, they produced tin-glazed earthenware, known as Delftware, in imitation of Chinese blue and white porcelain, but it was much coarser and creamier in colour than the true porcelain. And this Delftware was used for everyday items such as ointment and drug jars, but they often incorporated decorative Chinese chinoiserie motifs. Now, the secret of hard paste Chinese porcelain lay in the essential ingredients. So 2 types of decomposed granites, kaolin, china clay, and Porcelain china stone, as well as having a kiln that was capable of firing at the necessary really high temperatures. English factories began to produce soft paste porcelain from around 1745, using white clays, ground glass, and bone ash. But the first successful commercial production of hard paste porcelain in England was achieved by the New Hall China Manufactory in Staffordshire from 1781. And we're lucky enough to have in our collections at Marble Hill a tea service, I'm showing you the teapot now, which was made by New Hall in about 1810. And it's been painted in the chinoiserie style using underglazed blue and orange enamels and gold, and includes a motif unique to New Hall. So the knop on the lid of the teapot is actually modelled as a Chinese hat. Attempts were also made in Europe to copy the lacquer finish through a process called japanning. While true lacquer pieces used a highly toxic sap from trees growing in Japan, Korea, and southern China, which is difficult to import in its raw state because it dried out. The English japanner used a mixture of size and whitening, which is applied in successive layers to the wood, then blackened or coloured, varnished and polished. Now, japanning became a popular ladies' pastime, and a number of manuals and books of designs were produced to aid the amateur. This japanned cupboard was produced in England in about 1820, and the pine and beech had been carved in order to imitate bamboo. Now you see on top of the cupboard these small tea and coffee containers, which were produced in the 19th century, and actually using a technique that was developed in 1660 by Thomas Allgood of Pontypool, Monmouthshire, which was a method of japanning on metal, which became known as Pontypool Japan. Hanging above the bookcase, there's a mirror dating from the 1760s. And this and the other mirrors in our collections are really a remarkable example of cultural exchange. The glass was made in Vauxhall, London, at the leading English glass manufactory, before being transported to China for highly skilled Chinese artists to decorate, and then brought back to be sold on the English market. As you can only imagine, this process of glass kind of going back and forth. Now, they're really interesting because they're produced using a technique called back painting. This, or reverse painting, which basically involved drawing the design on the reverse of the mirror and then scraping the silverings, the amalgam of tin and mercury from the areas which would then be painted using enamels. And the designs were often inspired by European engravings of landscape and genre scenes. So again, this very kind of hybrid style. There are certain mirrors in the collection at Marble Hill where you can actually trace the exact prints that were used as the basis for the scenes. But many of them also show the European trend for small scale domestic scenes known as conversation pieces, there are some beautiful examples again in the collection at Marble Hill, but they're kind of borrowing from that style. And you see the example here, and this is actually the only mirror in the collection that retains the function of a looking glass, as the decoration will frame the viewer's face. So these mirror paintings are a perfect example of the hybrid nature of chinoiserie, a style which was as much about European reflections as East Asian artistry and ingenuity. For Henrietta Howard, the style offered the opportunity to express her taste and agency, introducing the pattern, delicacy, and sheen of chinoiserie to the perfect proportions of her Palladian villa.
Thank you so much, Esme. I'm sure all of us on this lecture have just been wowed by kind of the global links and also how beautiful the collection is. And we really can't wait for it to be shared more fully when the house is open in spring. So it's really fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise with such generosity with us. We're really very grateful. We've got a few questions from the floor that we would love to be able to pose to you. And the first is around the collection of Henrietta's collection. How do we know it's definitely hers? And can you tell us more about the inventory?
Yeah, absolutely. It is really tricky to know what, but it was hers is the simple answer. The inventory is frustratingly brief in its descriptions, as inventories of that period tend to be. So you could have, you know, a description of the chair that's just a very basic description of the chair, and maybe listing materials, but not even kind of necessarily any details of any carving or even style. So it's very difficult to say no, that if we saw on the market a piece that it was Henrietta's rather than just someone else's, you know, the right period. So it's really tricky. So the pieces that have been able to have been brought back, so the original pieces that belong to Henrietta that have come back to Marble Hill and are now part of the collection, basically is where we had some more clues. So for example, the lacquer screen that I showed, as I said, it had her coat of arms on it. So obviously that's a great clue, that it literally bears that mark. And then the other pieces, so there's the beautiful Panini paintings, which are in the great room as over doors and over the fireplace. So they were able to kind of come back because actually there are photographs of them in situ. So there are, because I think they were treated almost part of the interior decoration, they actually weren't removed when other items were. So they actually can be seen in photographs. There was photographic evidence, basically, that they were there. And then the peacock table, which I talked about and showed you an image of, that's our one remaining of the four. And again, that was brought back. And largely, I mean, it's basically being able to trace provenance. So we were able to work out its route. So when it had left Marble Hill and where it had got to, and kind of basically tracing that in reverse. So that's how we knew that was from Marble Hill. So it is a really tricky process, because that inventory is kind of our core document, but actually we don't necessarily, you know, have lots of descriptions of the items. So yeah, coats of arms, any inscriptions in books. So for example, Henrietta's great niece Henrietta Hoffen wrote it actually in the books that she'd taken them from Marble Hill. So anything like that really helps us, but it is a very tricky process, which is why we have basically acquired pieces that are period appropriate and style appropriate, because obviously we want the house to, you know, feel like a home and feel like Henrietta's home. So that's why that approach has been taken, because we won't necessarily get all of her pieces back.
Fantastic. It sounds like a very difficult job to be able to
it's particularly tricky for Marble Hill.
We've got some lovely thanks from the team, particularly one that says that they love the association between chinoiserie and the feminine. The kind of chinoiserie obsession is almost like the women's equivalent of the Grand Tour, which I couldn't agree more. Do you agree, Esme?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that kind of thing. It's almost like they're carving out that space for themselves. And it is a funny thing, because it has got a lot of criticism and satire attached to it, that basically it wasn't refined and educated in the classical style, but actually they were making purchases. They were able to kind of purchase porcelain, they were able to express their taste. So I think it's I think when you remove all that layer of kind of criticism, actually that it was a way of expressing their particular taste.
Fantastic. And just in terms of that, that information about the dispute of the builders, where does that come from? Where did you find out that, Jem?
So that's in the archives, that there's basically a bill where it's it's Thomas Bromwich basically saying, yes, you should, this is what it should cost, this is basically, so that's why that particular item survived. And it's that discussion with the lawyer basically about, yes, it was worth that amount. If the process had gone smoothly, like many things at Marble Hill, we probably wouldn't have a record of it happening. It's basically, it's because it's Thomas Bromwich saying, yes, it is worth that amount of money and they should be paid. It's in the archives.
I'm so pleased they disputed it.
It's one of those funny things. It tends to be the case where things go slightly awry. They leave a bigger imprint, don't they, in terms of in history. So you find out about it.
And I've got one last question, which is, what is your favourite part of the collection, Esme?
It's always really difficult to choose. I think one of my favourite pieces, or it's multiple items, if I can get away with that. It's a suite.
All right.
It's a suite of furniture. So the Northeast suite, as it's known, so it's a suite of a settee and chairs, which has really beautiful needlework covers on them, upholstery. And they were produced by a lady called Anne Northey in around 1760. And they're really, they're beautiful to look at because they're so lively in terms of their decoration, the scenes that they depict, so all these pastoral scenes, and there's everyone is different and show great kind of imagination. But I'm also really, it's that fascinating thing that she stitched those herself, and it's that kind of contact with her as well. And although it's not original to Marble Hill, we know it's the type of thing that Henrietta had. So we know she had a needlework sofa, for instance, in the Great Room. And we know that her friends did kind of similar needlework projects. So yeah, it's a really beautiful piece. And it's always that thing with textiles that they actually have survived as well, because they're so vulnerable to time. So so that's probably my favourite kind of piece in the collection.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and indeed for sharing your fantastic talk. It's been really great to whet everyone's appetite for the house being open for free in the spring. Don't forget that you can donate if you're able to. If you go to the Marble Hill Revived page, an English Heritage page, you can go to and donate there to be part of the story. We've got lots of people saying thank you and brilliant talk, Esme. So thank you so much. Do join us next week for the next autumn lecture series, Marble Hill Local to Global. And if you go to, and you can hear Tracy Borman talk about her Henrietta. So we look forward to seeing you next week, but a huge thanks to Esme, and we wish you well for your new exciting adventure, and know that your home is always at Marble Hill.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.